I've seen some crazy stuff when working search and rescue near the Jefferson Wilderness area in Colorado. I was called in to help after a father and son had got separated while hiking. The son began wandering around for about a week before we found him alive but sickly looking, very thin and extremely aloof. When we finally got him to go lie down in the back of our truck, he would not even make eye contact or even look at us when we talked. He acted like we weren't there and stared off into space and said nothing until his father showed up. But what really made me wonder about the kids were the cuts on his chest and arms. They looked self-inflicted, like with some kind of tool. The story gets more interesting. After getting this kid back safely with the father, search team began finding numerous remnants of camps all over the place. It was like somebody had been living off the land for a while, but they'd done it in numerous places and were constantly moving around. In one spot, we found human remains. It looked like they were from other people's camp's leftovers. No clothing or hair, but bones showed signs of being chewed on by human teeth. After a more extensive search through the area, we came across a person who matched dozens of otherwise eyewitness accounts from hikers and hunters. He was tall, naked, almost half human, covered in dirt and grass, cuts all over his body, and covered with what looked like old blood. Well, we got the kid back to his family safe, but he apparently had some serious mental problems. Meanwhile, we had found this person living alone in a small cavern with some tools and weapons stashed away. We didn't know what to think of him. He was so far gone to communicate with us at all. He was almost feral. When they brought him out of the cavern, he did not even look at us or make any noise. We called search and rescue again for advice on how to proceed with him, even though it wasn't in our jurisdiction. The man clearly needed mental help. They told us that there's not really anything specific for this kind of situation. They asked us to take care of it ourselves until more official people arrived who would have more resources available to them. So we did. The whole team took turns watching him, trying to get him to eat or drink or anything, but he wouldn't respond. I think he was eventually psychologically evaluated, and I don't know what happened to him after that. But I believe that he was cannibalizing on the bodies of campers out there, somewhere. At least that's what I was told by the coroner, from the evidence, that the bones matched his teeth. We don't know his past, his history, or how long he had been out there surviving. But whatever it was or however long it had completely stripped him of almost all of his humanity. He had become nothing more than a feralized cannibal of the wild. My uncle used to work as a forest ranger back in Wyoming, and in family reunions, he'd always tell the most crazy stories. My dad would always claim he exaggerated and made them sound creepier than what they probably were. I thought so too, until a few days ago when they became more real than I ever wanted. Now that I gotta deal with it, I guess if I tell it to somebody, it might be able to help finally bring some light to the events. Anyway, here it goes. My uncle was as every other weekday, just roaming around the forest outskirts, doing some routine patrolling. He was going through his normal route, making sure there was nothing out of the ordinary. But as he walked, he happened to notice something strange on the floor. A few steps away from the path, it seemed like a cocktail sausage from far away. He wasn't sure why it called his attention or how he even managed to spot it here in the middle of the forest floor. But he decided to approach it and give it a closer look. As soon as he got close, he realized the sausage had a nail ring attached to it. It was also definitely not a sausage. It was a freshly severed human finger, lying next to the forest path. Disgusted and disturbed, he decided not to touch and hurried back to his office. Soon, the police were there, and the small forest path became a crime scene. The finger was picked up and forensics performed DNA tests on it. It belonged to a young woman named Katie Roth, who at this point had been reported for around 90 days. Her last known location had been near that very forest. As you'd expect, this discovery reignited the spirits of her search. The finger had clearly been cut not too long ago. She was probably still in the area. The police began a series of collective search and rescue missions around the forest with the help of neighbors. They did their first sweep of the entire area of my uncle's find, but found absolutely nothing. They expanded their search to the entire section of forest, but still, no more traces of Katie were ever found. The police gave it one last try, but sending a few small patrols to check around the entire park for any suspicious activity, they managed to find nothing related to her disappearance. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth, leaving only her finger behind. 2 months later, even the police gave up on Katie's case once again, and search parties were dissolved. And just like that, Katie was erased from the town's collective memory once again. Her stray finger an extinguished beacon of hope. My uncle never managed to forget, though. He assures the day he found the finger, he could have just walked a bit deeper inside the forest and ran onto her. He swears he could feel her presence. However, what made him run was the fact that, according to him, she didn't feel entirely human. It had been around 4 months since my uncle's find, and by now, even him had mostly managed to forget about it. Everybody thought that this was the end of it. It was far from over. One of these weeks, as he was doing his daily patrols again, he nearly tripped with a black cardboard box, neatly and inconveniently placed on the main path. He picked it up, carefully opening it. Inside was a neatly handwritten letter and a printed photograph. There were not any letter or photograph. They were a letter written by Katie herself and a photo of her. Frightened but curious, he decided to check them out. The letter was addressed to her parents. It said for them not to worry about her. She found a new home and finally discovered who she was meant to be all along. It was very extenuating and demanding, but after a few months of hard work, she'd finally succeeded. A small physical sacrifice had to be performed for her transformation to be complete. She'd chosen to sever her last worldly attachment, the finger where she wore her engagement ring. The photo showed the missing woman herself, holding her bloody stump towards the camera, smiling. She wore a very fancy cocktail dress, but stood in the middle of the forest. Around her, several figures with bright yellow coats and hoods, wearing grotesque smiley face masks, stood solemnly. Shaken to his core, he took the box straight to the police. And once they confirmed both the photo and the letter were both legitimately hers, the search was reignited. Neighbors weren't called this time, though. They were dealing with something potentially dangerous. By this point, I think it's redundant to say they found absolutely nothing. Just as before, the search went cold again, and Katie was never heard of. My uncle used to constantly have her on his mind. He is one of those people who gets really annoyed about not knowing, so this mystery always gave him a certain amount of unease. I think telling us about it was also sort of a release. Otherwise, there were no strings to pull, no yellow brick road to follow. He just had to live with the mystery, or so we thought. On one of his last weeks, an old friend from work paid him a visit. At first, they just made a bit of small talk, but suddenly, he had brought up Katie's case. My uncle didn't quite feel comfortable talking about it, but then his friend brought some new light. Somebody had found one of those smiley masks from the photo, left exactly on the area he had on his previous findings. I could see relief on his face. He'd begun to think he might have just imagined it all. He talked to me and told that, even though he'd made his peace with it, he'd be happy if he knew I would try and find out the truth. So, I guess I gotta do it for the old man. If anybody has heard anything or something similar to what I just described, let me know. Let's see if we can finally manage to uncover what happened to Katie. Back in 1996, I worked for the Wildlife Fish and Game in California. While I was working out in the Bay Area, my team and I were specifically called to investigate a suspicious animal sighting near Yosemite National Park by some campers camping in a very isolated location. They claimed they saw something not of this world, as they claimed. We arrived at their location and began our investigations almost immediately. That night, we set up a tent where we gathered with the witnesses and asked them what had happened that day on the campsite. They claimed that it all started when one of them noticed a strange smell from his pop-up camper on the morning after. It was unlike anything they had smelled before. But he had not paid much mind to it, thinking it might be coming from somewhere else nearby. But as the day went on, one of us noticed movement outside the campsite near the tree line. We all looked over and saw a large black creature walking through the wilderness. It was as if it was looking for something. They claimed the thing was massive and had to be at least 8 to 9 feet tall, its body covered in dark matted fur. They were terrified, but it got closer, but they could see its face, which was also covered in hair. But its eyes were the most terrifying. They were bright and glowing red. They didn't know what to do. They began packing up their things to leave immediately, but as they were doing so, this creature began getting closer. It began moving faster. They screamed, running off to their cars, and drove off, leaving behind everything. As they drove away, this thing stood there, watching them from the tree line. It was not moving at all, just standing there, motionless, watching them. It was then that they suddenly remembered. They told me that they believe it was a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call it. They told us that they believe he protects the forest, but they think they're at harm. After we had listened to their story, we thought it was simply a misidentification of a black bear. We humored them, took down their story, and did a thorough search of the area. We didn't really find any evidence. However, we did find 2 things that are considerable. The first one is a very large scat pile that looked very much like a human scat pile, although much, much larger. Tests are still being run on it as we speak. And the other thing we thought was interesting is within 30 feet of that same scat pile, which is about a quarter mile from their tent site, is a very, very large singular footprint. It measured 19.5 inches long by 9 inches wide, a behemoth human-sized footprint. The indent was about 5 inches deep in the ground. Whatever made this had to be very heavy, and it really made me start pondering the truth and the stories of the whole Bigfoot and Sasquatch phenomenon. As a ranger, I've had my fair share of strange experiences, and one particular stands out. A family was camping near one of our backcountry sites, and the young daughter disappeared in the middle of the night. We had found her several hours later, hiding in a small cave about a mile from the campsite. She was weeping and terrified. When asked her what happened, she told us she had seen a monster that chased her and dragged her away. We never found out what she saw, but it was definitely not anything natural. This is just one of many stories that has been documented by rangers. Many of these involve children who have seen cryptids or other paranormal entities. In some cases, children are never found, and their fate remains a mystery. One such case is that of Aiden Park. On July 22, 2007, Aiden Park went missing from Olympic National Park in Washington State. He was only 6 at the time and was never found. Witnesses reported seeing a large black creature with glowing eyes near where Aiden disappeared. Some believe that this creature may have been responsible for his disappearance. Another tragic case is that of Kenneth. Kenneth was 13, disappearing in May of 1966. He was last seen walking down a rural road in Nova Scotia, Canada. Kenneth's body was eventually found in a wooded area near the road, but the cause of death could not be determined. Many believe that Kenneth was killed by a cryptid known as the Beast of Bladenborough, although that is just speculation, because this particular cryptid is usually seen around North Carolina. However, these are just a handful of strange encounters and missing persons that I could share with you. As you know, David Politis has actually gone on to share many of these stories, but I have many stories he has not yet uncovered, and I would like to share them with you. If your audience would appreciate it, I think they would like to hear more of these. Let me know, and thank you for all that you do. I live in Chesterfield, Missouri, and my family isn't really rich, but we are comfortable. So, pretty much my whole life, I've had some kind of job so that I can buy myself anything I need that my parents don't want to buy me. So mostly the useless stuff. Last summer, I got an amazing job as a park ranger in the Gateway Arch National Park here in St. Louis, Missouri. It was not a far drive from where I lived, and I don't need to worry about transportation. Also, it was by far the coolest and most exciting and interesting job I've ever had. I got to see the nature, and it was very fun and exciting. I love working with people, and the park is pretty popular. It also has a lot of visitors. I had just begun working there, so I didn't exactly know the park by heart, and I still needed to learn about many of the parts and activities in it. So I was starting to be placed mostly on the night shifts. That didn't really quite suit me because I was not a night owl and would be moody during the night. But the upside was there was really not a lot of work, and the older rangers would do most of it, so I would either sit around or walk or try and explore. There was a guy working on my shifts. I really liked him. So one night, when there wasn't a lot of work, I asked him to take a walk with me and Daisy, his guard dog, to check up on if everything was in order. He was also new to the job, so you can see how obvious it was that I was checking up on the park. We were joking around for a while, walking next to the river, and Daisy suddenly slipped away and began chasing something. I ran after her as fast as I could, and Mac followed after. I got to the bridge running after her and saw her in the middle of literally barking at thin air. To say I was confused would be an understatement, as to say Daisy lost her mind as well. Suddenly, I noticed something approaching us from the other side of the bridge. It seemed to be a man, but he was insanely tall and wearing a large black coat. Daisy went crazy, barking at the guy and began chasing him. I looked back, and Mac was gone, but I didn't even notice he left. Everything happened so fast. As I turned around, Daisy went to bite the guy, but as she got to him, he just disappeared. She was just as confused as me and came back to me. We ran to the front of the park to find Mac, ask him where he went and if he saw the guy. I also wanted to report him because he probably wasn't supposed to be inside. But Mac said he had no idea what I was talking about, and he never saw anybody. He just couldn't catch up to us when I was running after Daisy, so he went back. But I distinctly remember him being right after me and going onto the bridge with me. Soon after, I quit my job. It was just too much for me. I had the creeps every time I got to my job. I still do to this day, and have no idea what happened that night. I'm a ranger at the West Coast National Park. I have been for almost 10 years now. I've seen a lot of things at this job, but one event that I never told anybody about until now, because I always thought I was crazy. It was July of last year. I was working both shifts because I was in need of a serious vacation, and it fit my schedule, so I would finally have extra time off. During the day, I kept seeing this man, who seemed very familiar to me somehow. Everywhere I went, somehow, he seemed to be at the same place, and after a few hours, it became suspicious. I felt like he was following me or something. But then, that didn't make sense because I showed up after him, and I began to think he might be uncomfortable or thinking I was following him. But for real, every place I needed to be that day, he was there before me. I was getting quite creeped out and couldn't wait for the park to close for the night, so I'd have some rest. My vacation was coming in just 2 days. We had closed the park off at 11 that night, and by midnight, almost everything was done. We were ready to start wasting our time. At around 2 in the morning, I felt like taking a walk to get some fresh air. As I was walking, I began hearing footsteps behind me, but every time I would look back, there was nothing. Not even the wind was blowing because it was a hot July night, so I brushed it off. I thought I might be losing my mind or something. I continued my walk because I couldn't be bothered. But I only had passed a few meters before I heard a deep voice behind me asking me if I had recognized him. I quickly looked back, but there was no one there. I suddenly remembered the guy I was seeing today. It was my uncle. I had only seen him in photos and videos because he had died a few years before I was ever born. I will never be able to describe the fear I felt in that moment, alone during the night, hearing footsteps and voices. I ran back to the guys, but I didn't tell them because they would definitely call me crazy. I've never told anybody about this until now, and to this day, I'm frightened of walking alone at night, as well as working night shifts. Niagara Falls State Park is located on the border of New York and Canada. It's a popular tourist destination, with people coming to see both the falls themselves and the wildlife in the park. But according to one ranger, it's also home to something far more sinister. The ranger, who wished to remain anonymous, told me that he's seen and encountered all sorts of cryptids in the park. He said that he's seen everything from giant snakes to werewolves, that each sighting leaves him shaken. I've been working here for years and I've never seen anything like it, he told me. It's like this park is cursed. He went on to say that there have been numerous cases of hikers going missing in the park, and that oftentimes their bodies are never found. It's as if they just vanished into thin air, he said. The ranger also told me about a cryptid known as the Wendigo. According to him, the Wendigo is a spirit that inhabits the woods near Niagara Falls. He said that it's a creature of pure evil, cannibalistic, and those who see it are usually driven mad by terror. I've seen it myself, he said. It's the most horrifying spirit you could ever see. It has razor teeth, eyes that burn with malice, and a deformed human shape. He went on to say that the Wendigo is responsible for many of the disappearances in the park, or so he believes, and that it's attracted to the fear of its victims. Everybody who goes into the woods, they're afraid, he said. The Wendigo feeds on that fear. He again described it as a tall, thin humanoid creature with long, claw-like fingers. He told me that when the Wendigo is hungry, it's known for preying upon lost campers and hikers in order to satiate itself. It usually kills them and eats their remains. Despite numerous sightings over the past few years, there have been no reports of anybody actually capturing footage. I don't feel it's safe to go into the woods. The Wendigo is always watching. Again, the ranger wishes to remain anonymous. As far as factual evidence of the Wendigo existing in Niagara Falls State Park, that is yet to be further concluded. This is my first time posting an experience of mine on the internet, so pardon any mistakes or errors I may make. I might not be the best storyteller, but this is one incident that I think needs to be shared to the world. So here I am. For context, I'm a ranger, currently stationed in one of the biggest national parks of North America, which I'm not comfortable naming here. I will tell you this, it's in the state of California. As part of the job, I'm required to stay inside for a major portion of the year. We have a dedicated space for residing rangers here, which isn't exactly luxurious, but gets the job done. We have the option for individual housing as well as a roommate arrangement, and the latter is the one that I currently have opted for. Bert, whom we'll call him, my roommate, is also my patrol partner, and we get along quite well. Now, ever since I became a ranger about 13 years ago now, I've had no experience which is out of the ordinary. My life had been extremely simple and peaceful until last week, when this occurred. We were just returning to the cabin from our post-dinner walk, which is pretty much a custom for us at this point. As rangers, we obviously don't need to walk since we're on our feet pretty much all day, but it's relaxing when it's not work-related, so we enjoy it. At this point, it was around 2 a.m. when we reached the cabin. Dinner time for us depends largely on the duties we were assigned for the day, so we can never have our meals at regular times. We were also facing a staff shortage at the park, which greatly increased the workload on all the existing personnel. Anyway, while Bert was unlocking the door, my wondering eyes noticed a figure standing near a large oak tree directly opposite to the cabin just a few yards away. When I tried to focus, the figure disappeared. Obviously, I chalked it up to my imagination. Why would somebody be here in the middle of the night anyway? Without giving it another thought or bringing this up with Bert, I went inside the cabin to call it a night. A few minutes later, while returning from the washroom, I saw the figure once more from my bedroom window. The tree is perfectly visible from the window, and the figure was right there where I'd seen it before. Again, it was only visible for about a split second, but this time, I got goosebumps for some reason. I felt like I was not imagining it, and someone was indeed out there. However, it wasn't plausible that a person could just vanish into thin air, so I told myself to calm down and sleep. Now, I'm usually a sound sleeper, but that night, I had trouble. I was tired from both the long day of work and the long walk we had. Yet, I kept tossing and turning in my bed, waiting for sleep to finally arrive. When I finally fell asleep, I was greeted by a nightmare. I don't remember all of it, specifically the starting or the build-up part, but I do remember the main part. I was standing near the tree, and I could see myself and Bert entering our cabin. I followed us inside, only to find me and Bert lying dead in the middle of our room. Our faces bloody, and our bodies extremely disfigured. I woke up in a cold sweat. Even though the room was really dark, I could make out the outline of a man standing near my bedroom door. Instantly, I switched my lamp on, but of course there was nothing. At this point, I was rather frightened. I did not feel sleepy anymore, but I needed the rest, so I decided to get up and heat up some water. Tea always makes me feel drowsy for some reason. In the kitchen, I found Bert at the dinner table, also having some tea. I asked him why he was up at 4 a.m, and he answered by asking me the same question. We went back and forth for a while before he finally gave in and told me he had this lucid nightmare. Once again, I got goosebumps. I asked him what it had been about, and he described his dream in detail, which was exactly the same one that I had had. I couldn't believe it, and my expressions probably gave away the sheer terror I felt, because he asked me what was up. With some hesitation, I told him what was up. He chuckled at first, probably thinking I was mocking him, but when I mentioned the weird figure that I had been seeing out of the corners of my eyes, his expressions changed drastically. It turns out, he too had felt somebody was following us throughout our walk, but only had not wanted to say anything since he was tired and felt that he was only imagining it. Also, while entering the cabin, he thought he saw a hooded man inside, but when I had turned on the lights a second later, there had been nothing there. Something was definitely up, and I was panicking. Bert suggested we sleep after sunrise, since ghosts don't attack in the morning, which made me laugh. It was a childish suggestion after all, but in that moment, it sounded like a plan, so I agreed. However, sleeping was the least of our worries at that point. What did all this drama mean, and who had been following us? Anyway, around 5 a.m., my drowsiness finally came back. It was also bright outside now, so I felt more courageous than I had not long ago. I went straight to bed after wishing Bert a good night, and slept like a baby till about 3 p.m., when Bert woke me up for our shift. Nothing had happened since. I was admittedly scared to return to our cabin to sleep that night, but thankfully nothing happened. I don't know what to think of it. I would have managed to forget the incident if it hadn't been for today. Today, while driving to the cabin after the end of our shift, I felt like I saw the same figure in the rearview mirror yet once again. I haven't seen it since getting home, and I have not told Bert about it, but I'm scared and therefore I want my story out on the internet. If the dream becomes a reality, I'm pretty sure it would make headlines and you will all know that I am no more. If nothing happens and I survive the night, I'll update you about whatever happens tonight. If anything, until then, please, keep me in your prayers. I've worked as a ranger for nearly 20 years now, but I still cannot forget what happened on the 15th of October 2006. I joined the park just a few months before the weird, unlucky day, around the 22nd of August 2006. Some of the senior, older park rangers were still showing me the ropes at that time. They were very helpful and supportive most of the time, but they decided to pull a prank on me that day in October in the morning. My morning routine includes waking up super early, an hour more before my work shift, and then I run a few miles before coming back to the cabin, dedicated to the resident park rangers where I stayed. I would take a shower, then go eat with the rest of my colleagues before we went off on our assigned duties for that day or month. It depended on the task roster from day to day. Anyway, I woke up at 5:45. The sun hadn't risen yet, but there were more than enough light already by that time. I ran inside the deep part of the forest of the park area, so there were some spots that were not as lit up as the rest of the open sky. Anyway, a few minutes go by after I was already deep in the woods, and I heard a rustling behind me, like somebody was running with me. I slowed down my pace and turned around, but there was nobody, although I could still hear the rustle and light thuds as if somebody was matching my pace. I came to a stop and checked for the noise. It had stopped, just as I had. Well, I found that very strange. I called out and asked if anybody was there, and if they needed help, but it was all just my own echo that I had heard back. I shrugged it off once again and started running. The rustling and thuds became once more. It began to freak me out, because if this were any of my colleagues, they would have definitely made some noise or revealed themselves. But what frightened me the most was the fact that the thuds did not seem to be that of a human's to me. I picked up my pace and began to run quicker. In the blink of an eye, I saw a huge, black thing just cross me, jumping into the opposite direction of where I thought the noise was coming from. I felt like my heart would stop at any instant. I knew it was an animal, but I didn't know which, so I turned around and made my way back to the cabin. I slowed down in front of the cabin's wooden door and bent down on my knees to catch my breath. I glanced back, but I couldn't see anything, and it sounded a lot more awfully quiet. I thought I would ask the rest. That's when I opened the door, stepped inside, only to get a whole bucket of ice water dropped on me, followed by tomato ketchup and sauces. At least, that's what I could tell from how it looked and smelt. I heard a roar of laughter, shook my head and went to take a shower. At the breakfast, one of my fellow rangers at the time apologized for the prank they decided to pull on me. I told them it wasn't a huge deal. Then, he said he was apologizing for anything that would happen for the next day, and winked at me. I found it weird, but obviously that indicated they had something more planned. I went about my job. At night, I was walking back the same trail that I did every day, back when I noticed small feathers hanging from the tree branches. They were red, but what made me the most intrigued was the fact that they weren't feathers of a real bird. It looked more like a toys or bird puppets, which meant there was a chance there was a kid there in the park, though it didn't make sense for one to be there. The feathers being there, just on that specific day, meant if it wasn't a kid, it was somebody else. I followed the trail of red feathers that ended up near a fallen log. There was a small featherless red puppet bird there indeed. When I picked it up, it was not red color. It was fresh red blood. I dropped it, looked around to see if there was anything else there, and that's when I saw a tiny hand poking out of the log. There was dried, muddied blood around the log. Immediately, I radioed it in, and all other rangers at the time rushed to the scene. They called the police, helped to push over the huge log, and found a young girl with claw marks all over her body. None of us had noticed it before, like I had mentioned, and I passed through that trail every day. But something was very different that day. The cops had told us the girl died close to about 20 hours ago, which spooked me, because that was when I had been out on my run and noticed the wild animal. I had reported that to the police, and they searched everything but could not find anything, including the identity of the girl. Even now, to my knowledge, the case remains unsolved, but what none of us could understand or try to explain was how, if the girl was killed that day, did something manage to lift a heavy log and put it over the girl in an attempt to hide it? No matter how we went about it, moving a big log was a movement we couldn't have missed. It should have been too noticeable for us rangers. It scared us, and even though we didn't talk about it after that day, I know what happened was real. Hi there. I've been listening to your content for quite a while now, and there is this temptation to write you about this strange event that happened just a few weeks ago. While I'm not a park ranger myself, I spend a lot of time outdoors because I'm a paddling instructor and a guide. I'm a 40-year-old woman. I work with people of different ages, teaching, guiding them, and sometimes mixing a little bit of tourism here and there. The academy I work for decided to offer short trips through places of historical importance as a way to entertain and educate students, consumers, customers, and attract more people. And one of the places we make excursions towards is Chickamauga National Park. For those who don't know, the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park are located in northern Georgia and southeastern Tennessee. They are known because it preserves two important sites that were both major battles of the American Civil War. The park itself does not offer excursions through its creeks. It is two, and both are by the boundaries of the park. Yet, the waterways are only accessible to people who paddle from outside the park. There were also events in the waterways during the war, and I often entertain people by telling them. The conflict was bloody, and there are lots of creepy stories about the spirits of dead soldiers, apparitions, ghouls, and other stuff happening there. I can't deny things sometimes seem eerie when you're alone there, but I normally hike in groups. Sorry for the long introduction, but I feel it's important to give context to things. One afternoon, we decided to go paddling towards the park with a bunch of my coworkers. We are just nature lovers and sports enthusiasts, so we like to go out on our own every once in a while. Just in case we returned around dusk, we made sure we had plenty of lights and lanterns on board for safety measures. It would only be a couple of hours, but there was no way we'd stay there until night hours. So, we began paddling on our kayaks through the water current, pretty much doing our stuff until we reached the park's area. I don't think I can explain this, but I felt a chill running down my back when we entered the park's territory. I'd feel creepy stuff hiking around the park, but never on boat. Since there were four of us, I just ignored it, and we kept advancing. The water made its noises, but after some time, I noticed things seemed strangely quiet on land at our sides. My people seemed to think the same, but nobody said it out loud. Do you know this collective sensation people get after spending years together? Well, we all got this sensation that something was off. After a couple of moments, one of my rangers started to make a noise, and we immediately looked towards where she was looking. What we saw was this strange person staring at us by the edge of the water flow. Its hair was long. At first, I thought it was an androgynous-looking boy. His teeth were long and pointy, just like an animal's. But the scary part were the eyes, glaring, and a very greenish-orange color, and shiny, and clever. I immediately understood that whatever he was, or whoever he was capable of intelligence. Now, one of my colleagues, a 55-year-old man, gave the signal, and we began paddling out of there. Didn't stop to return after an hour or so. We just wanted to make sure we wouldn't meet that thing again. We returned with our flashlights on and saw nothing, but nothing will erase the chill we felt when we saw the old green eyes. We'd often joke about the ghost stories, since we're quite skeptical, but what we saw that day is something that nobody will bother to decipher, and it's better that way. Hi, my name is Kevin, not my real name, of course. I'm 32. I work as a ranger, and I work in a park in southern Argentina. Excuse my English. Its name makes reference to the glaciers there, on the Austral Andes Mountains, close to the national border of Chile. People are allowed to camp there, as long as they follow the rules. Some don't do it, and depending on the type of behavior visitors show, we can solve the problems ourselves or end up calling for the army. If somebody gets lost or injured, it's up to us or the army going inside to help them. We spend a lot of time outdoors, weeks and months, and I remember one particular event that happened a few years ago. We had a new ranger, a young woman who was in her later 20s. I was left in charge of showing her around. You see, while most of our jobs involve hiking and parking, We have cabins where we rest and keep a couple of bicycles around just in case we need to move around, without the need of noisy transportation. So, one afternoon, we received news of people lighting a small bonfire which is strictly forbidden inside the park. I got dispatched to go see what was going on with the new girl. We'll call her Mariana. We contact the people, a family, and first, but kindly, later firmly tell them not to do it. We want to avoid all wildfires. I remember one of the boys, of around 18 or 19, stared at Mariana and got this weird feeling, but we ignored him. We eventually returned to our steps and kept on with our routines until night. I remember having this weird dream, as if I was another person seeing the cabin from the outside, walking around and trying to see through the windows. In the dream, I walked towards the cabin, trying to open the door but could not. We always locked it down during the night. Some strange and creepy people just happened, and then looking at the chain bicycles. Cue the next day, and I remember feeling weird and telling the dream to my colleagues. There were 4 of us at the cabin at the time. When I got out to open the door, I see fresh footprints on the earth. Feeling a strange sensation, I walked back towards where people would keep the bicycles, and we see somebody broke the padlock with a large stone and stole a purple one, the same one Mariana used. I immediately told my team about it, and another guy and me immediately got to approach the family camping. They were gone, but Mariana's bicycle was by the place they left. The family also had a daughter and a little boy. They did not seem like the type to steal things nor go walking at night like some sort of stalker. I don't know. Something about that teenager seemed ugly to me, and the way he, because I'm sure it was him, not the parents, came towards our cabin at night and precisely stole the bicycle. I don't know, but I got these stalker vibes I didn't like. People have to follow their intuitions. We returned with the bicycle and used the radio to contact the personnel at the entrance to make sure the family left the national park grounds with all its members together. This is not a paranormal story, but a real one. Be careful when you are outdoors. Sometimes, the dangerous stuff isn't as ghostly, but of real-life people. I mean, we all know Mariana can handle herself in bad situations. She knows a lot about self-defense. But sometimes, strange people just happen. Be careful when you're out there. No matter what country, what place, always keep your guard up. When I was a little boy, my father had me join the Boy Scouts in the youngest group. He was the outdoor type person, and he had many different jobs, all revolving around being in nature. He was also a soldier in the army, a drill sergeant afterward, and a park ranger when he got older. Naturally, he wanted me to follow in his footsteps, so the first stop was the Boy Scouts, just to get me used to spending time in the wilderness and learning to care for myself. I'll admit it, I enjoyed those years, and he managed to awaken the desire inside me to want to join the army, just as he had intended. He passed a year ago, and my final step of career life was to honor him by doing the same thing he did. I became a ranger at the White River National Forest in Colorado. This national forest is huge, and there are hundreds of rangers employed, stationed on all different sides of the forest. There are also dozens of trails and creeks that you can hike over, and the scenery here is breathtaking, to say the least. In fact, it is so beautiful that many people try to stay there overnight and get lost from time to time. That's where we come to help them. Camping here is prohibited in most areas because there are several dangerous animals roaming free, like bears and bobcats, but some people don't want to listen to the warnings. Some of us carry tranquilizer pistol with us, in case there is an attack, so we can safely try and put the animal to sleep. One particular night, I was doing my tour of the forest, checking if there are people in forbidden places, when I heard a noise very far from my position. It sounded like somebody was hitting a tree or shaking it. It was an unusual sound, but lumber thieves have tried to steal some wood here in the past as well. So, I decided to check out the noise. The sound stopped after a couple of seconds, but I kept walking in the direction of where I had last heard it. After about a minute of absolute silence, A flock of black and white birds soared to the sky out of nowhere, beginning to fly away. It looked like they were startled by some other animal. I knew the dangers of going through these parts alone at night, but I decided to keep going slowly forward, hoping to see what could have spooked the birds. Now, before I got close enough to the place where the birds took off from, I noticed the thing that startled them. At first, I thought it was a large bear. From behind, I could only see it crouching on all fours, with its head pointed towards the ground. Its back was covered with long hair, much longer than bears usually have. I slowly reached out for my tranquilizer, just in case if the animal notices me, and tried to back away without making a sound to disturb it. I managed to get some distance from it, but then the most unfortunate thing happened for a situation like this. I got careless, stepping on a dry twig in the grass, and it cracked under my heavy boots. As soon as the twig cracked, I could hear the animal growling, and I knew it was aware of my presence. I was prepared to face a bear and put him to sleep. But what I saw next, I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. The hairy thing in front of me definitely wasn't a regular animal that you can see in the zoo. It got up from its crouching position and elongated its spine. It was now standing at about 10 feet tall with its arms as long as tree branches. The creepiest thing about it is that it did not have paws like what you would expect it to. It had gigantic hands and feet with fingers on them, like a huge human or a monkey. It pointed its nose upwards like it was trying to smell its prey. I was utterly terrified by seeing this thing, and my instincts took over. My body chose flight instead of fight, and before I knew it, I was running as far from this creature as I could. While my body was running on autopilot, my mind was trying to comprehend what I had just seen. The creature reminded me of one of the legends called Sasquatch. It looked like a humanoid monkey with arms and legs, but without a tail. It was hairy all over, and getting extremely close to me. With every step it took, I could feel the ground shaking. As soon as I realized it is impossible for me to outrun this creature, I turned, shot a tranquilizer at it. The dart landed in its arm, but it was not enough to put this humongous creature out. I began running away again, reloading the gun along the way. I shot 2 more, this time in its legs, and I could see they were slowing it down, at least. I shot my final dart at its chest and continued to run as fast as possible. After a minute or two, I no longer felt like I was being followed. I finally had a chance to slow down and catch my breath. I made my way back to the station and spent the next hour reading articles online. I tried to spend as much time as possible finding as much information as I could about the thing that I saw. And after an hour of scrolling and reading, I am convinced the creature I indeed saw was a Sasquatch. Its physical appearance matched the descriptions and sightings of other people's reports perfectly. I also came across a blog article of a man claiming he encountered one in the Rio Grande National Forest, which is just a few miles south of where I was originally stationed. After that night, I always keep my walks around in the forest short and as close to the station as possible. I've been working as a park ranger for about 10 years now. It's the best, and also the only job I've ever had. I knew that I wanted to become a ranger since I was very young, as my dad was one as well. It was so clear that this was more than just a job for him. He loved every minute of it. So I wanted to feel that same joy when working. So many people go through life doing a job they absolutely despise. My mother, well, she's a great example of that. She works as a teacher, hates every minute of it. My dad passed away during my first year of being a ranger. I knew he was very proud of me. In general, the job is amazing. However, some things have happened that weren't very pleasant, and sometimes even scary. I'm not going to lie. I'm pretty fit and strong, but I get spooked very easily. My mom is a very superstitious woman, and I guess I've picked that up from her. Sometimes it's small things, like weird objects showing up in places where they don't belong, or strange sounds coming from within the woods. This story, however, is particularly strange and scary. I have no way of explaining it to anybody. This happened 6 years ago, as I was walking all by myself on a hiking trail in the park that I was working in at the time. It was very quiet around, and it was already pretty late at night. There had been a storm the night before, so I was out to clear the trails before a lot of large branches and other objects had fallen down. They could potentially get somebody hurt. It was my duty to give tours and take care of campers and hikers, so this was part of my job. I had to make sure that visitors were safe at all times. I enjoyed the task, as it was quiet and pretty warm outside. After a little while, I heard a very high-pitched scream coming from in the woods. You can't imagine how much that scared me. It went from being completely silent and quiet to this sudden strange and loud noise. This was not an animal. This was a person. It took everything inside of me not to run away as fast as I could. But I figured that maybe somebody was in danger. The sound came from far away, pretty deep in the woods. I didn't feel like it was very safe to go where the sound came from, but I had to figure out who that was coming from and why they were screaming. As I walked closer and closer to where I had heard the sound, I heard loud thumps coming from behind me. It sounded like a very large person walking. When I turned around, there was nothing there. I had no idea what was going on, but it's safe to say that I was mortified. It took me a couple of seconds to gain some courage and keep on walking towards the sound. Just when I was about to call out for the person to make sure that I was walking in the right direction and to ask them what was going on, I heard the same high-pitched scream right in my ears, as if somebody was standing right there. I had never been that terrified in my life. I feared for my life at that point. That was the moment I decided it was not worth it, and ran straight back to where I had come from. I ran for my life. This was not the best decision, though, as I tripped over a big branch that was lying there. It was dark out, and aiming the flashlight to the ground as I was sprinting away was not the easiest thing to do. I fell face first onto the ground, but could not even feel the pain. My adrenaline was that high. So, without thinking, I jumped back up and began running again. I could not bring myself to even walk a little bit slower to make sure I did not fall again, because I had to get out of there. When I was almost back at the hiking trail, my heart sank. The same scream was now coming from right in front of me. It was sure coming from somewhere on the trail. I don't know how that was even possible. There was no way that whoever or whatever that was able to get faster than me. I stopped right in my tracks. I did not know what to do at that point. So, I decided to walk slowly towards the trail to see if there was something out there. I could not see anything, and I somehow found the courage to point my flashlight towards the trail. I was relieved. Nothing was there. When I lifted the flashlight higher to see the other side, that relief completely faded. I could see somebody standing behind a tree, a small but slender figure. When I walked onto the trail to get a better look, as soon as I pointed the light up to its face, it turned off. It was only for a couple of seconds, but when it turned on again, it was gone. I say it because I don't know what it was, but I know it was not human. I'm very certain that it wasn't. I have never been so terrified in my life before. I quit working in that park the next week. I just could not shake the fear. I was scared that it would happen again. Nothing weird has happened when I was working in the new park. I still work there now. I actually moved away because where I'm working now was too long of a drive away from my home at the time. That's just how terrified I was.